Greetings, Ago. Welcome. Happy Sunday. We hope that you are well, reaching your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength today. And if you're not there, that you're rapidly approaching. We are honored to have you here with us for this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And our topic today is the U.S. Second Amendment is racist as you know what. And we apologize for having our camera off. We are not in an area today that has strong internet. So this is one of the best ways that we can ensure that we don't get cut off, or at least we hope that we don't get cut off. And next week, we should be back to stronger internet, and you'll be burdened with having to view my face again. But for today, we'll just proceed as we are. We give honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere whose lands we inhabit, and we work with them in every angle possible to support them in getting their land back and establishing their own style of government, their own political, economic, and social order, and making the Americas what it should be so that it could reach its full potential and rise up out of the cesspool that it's been in for the last 531 years of colonialism. And in the same token, we honor our African ancestors and the wisdom they have imparted upon us, which allows us to fight for the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. And in doing so, we restore Africa to its highest potential and what it should achieve, and out of the cesspool that it has been in for the last 531 years of colonial domination and neo-colonial domination. So sit back today and participate in our very informative topic. The U.S. Second Amendment is racist as you know what. And we'll start, as we always do, with just our simple introductions about who we are. Our Ancestors' Voices is, of course, sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass pan-African political party with its base in Africa. We are fighting for the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. That's one continental socialist government in Africa. That is the definition of our objective, Pan-Africanism. And it is an objective which we know, once achieved, will solve the problems that we face, scattered and suffering 2 billion of us in almost 120 countries worldwide. And it will also be our strong contribution to the worldwide movement for socialist development leading to world communism, the highest level of human development that will ever be achieved at this point in our development. So that's our work. That's what we're working to do. And that work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined clearly in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is displayed by cover on the screen, and our strategy to bring about unity for all revolutionary Pan-African forces on the ground in Africa. That is the work that we do. And Our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by AAPRP organizers, myself, Ajamu, and Shakura, who is my biological and ideological daughter. So to get us started on this topic, the U.S. Constitutional Second Amendment is racist as you know what. I will turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Hoping that you all are safe, healthy, and well, and ready to talk about the contradictions. Yes, because there are so many. It is important to be aware and to acknowledge the lies and mistruths that have been fed to many of us even before we were born and while we were in the womb. So we can start with quoting the beautiful and illustrious Kwame Ture when he said that, quote, the US Constitution is toilet paper, end quote. These words spoken by Kwame Ture during an interview need to be said with absoluteness. They need to be said with confidence. They need to be said with assurance. that this is how many of us need to really think and really process what the Constitution really stands for. Because if you know anything about Kwame Ture, then you know that if he said that it needed to be treated as toilet paper, he was implying that it was not a document that African or even colonized people should see as a benefit to them. None of those folks should be taking that document seriously, and they certainly should not think that that document includes them whatsoever. And so, just thinking more about that and understanding how, with African folks who may have reflected some of those similar sentiments and were considering themselves to be conscious, and then even other people who, excuse me, may not have really understood the background, if you will, but now we're starting to get more deeper into, awakening our consciousness or doing more research, finding credible sources, joining an organization that's working for justice, whatever that looks like. And so now we're at a time where a lot of people understand that the Constitution was written by European men who, most of them were not only slave owners, but they probably were Ku Klux Klan members. They also probably shifted into becoming other parts of terrorizing slaves. So, in terms of militias and in terms of other entities that developed into that. And so we think more about that in terms of how they are the lowest of the low, because basically they created a document that they knew would never include the same people that they were trained to hunt, the same people that they were trained to murder, the same people that they were trained to harm sexually, if you understand what I'm saying. And so I think that these are things that we need to think more about, because living in America, living under a propaganda driven society where the agenda setting theory is in place and where you are taught to let someone else think for you, but you think you're thinking for yourself when really the propaganda is thinking for you and making you think that you thought of it. Okay. Let's see if you can follow that. And so if we are to be propagandized, then we did grow up understanding how important the Constitution was. We may have even went to a museum where they may have had a copy of this document and we could have seen how important it was. If you are in my generation, you may have grown up watching Schoolhouse Rock, where they made videos about the Constitution and how important it was and how the three branches of government are developed and all these things that make, quote unquote, America such a land of the free and an opportunity place to move to. But this also means that we've been propagandized to refer to these European folks who created this document as the quote forefathers, but really we should be thinking more about like how much criminality was attached to them. How many of these folks were harming people, especially indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere? How many of these people saw African enslaved people as property and had no intentions of including them in the document or having the document applied to them, because that would imply that they actually saw us as full human beings, and they did not. They still don't to this day. And so just thinking more about how it's dangerous, as we always talk about, you really shouldn't adopt the ideology that, this is your land and that you are American. You really should not, because really what that means is you're setting yourself up for disappointment, for failure, and really you're just forcing yourself to be with an identity that wants nothing to do with you, when in actuality that actually could endanger you and put you more at risk, because this country wants nothing to do with you. It wants everything to do with the land that you descend from, but it wants nothing to do with you. And it will stop at anything to make sure that you don't get in the way of getting access to those resources that they're pulling and exploiting and stealing from Africa as we speak. And so I think it's really important just to think more about that, because, from the moment we are born, we are indoctrined into being trained, especially if you grew up on indigenous land soil, you're indoctrined and trained to start sporting events with the national anthem. If you went to an institution that honored, not separating church and state, if you will, then you understand that there are still some schools to this day that recite the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. even though that has nothing to do with education. They cite it every day and take up valuable teaching time, if you ask me, with the students citing that, when really we could be getting more, reading skills developed. We could be working on math skills, writing. I mean, there's so many other things we could be doing with that time, but yet that's what takes place every morning. We can also think about how if you don't participate in these activities, then you are considered to be unpatriotic. Your behavior is considered to be un-American and all of these things. But I don't know if you ever stop to really think about, what does un-American mean? And by the opposite of that, so is it American to steal people's land, to harm them sexually, to take their life? Is that American? Yes, absolutely. So if that is the case, then I personally would not want to have anything to do with what it means to be American, because I don't see the value in taking the life from someone whose land I have stolen. But I'm also humanistic, and I also have ethics and values and things like that. So I guess that's what separates me. But I think those are really important concepts to really think about. Are you just adopting this ideology of being American because that's what you were taught? Are you adopting this ideology because you think there's nothing else out there for you? Are you adopting this ideology because you don't really know who you are? Maybe it's all of the above. And maybe this opportunity, this seminar today, will give you a real chance at exploring who you are and why it's okay to potentially refute and resist the current ideology that propaganda has put on you for so many years, and to actually start to consider what it means for you to take on another form, to adopt another lifestyle. I've been really pushing lately for being more conscious, African people to be more conscious of how colonial terms are embedded in our everyday norms and societies. So, really challenging Africans to really consider what it means to use the term African, and to devoid themselves from using the previous terms of African American or Black. Even as they roll off my tongue, my mind hesitates to let those words leave my mouth, because thankfully my environment has cultivated a space where I know that those are not terms that I don't even want to think about. They're not terms that I even want to let leave my mouth, because that means that I believe in them if I'm speaking them into existence, and I don't. I don't believe in those terms. I don't agree with those terms. I don't think those terms have value. I don't think they have meaning. I don't think they have accuracy. More importantly, I think that they were created by some people from Europe, and they got to decide how they wanted to classify me and my people. And I don't need any of that. We already have our own systems in place, and we already had our own names for our countries on our land before you all came over there and renamed everything and just disrupted all of the environmental balance that we already had. So, no, we shouldn't be using colonial terms, and we should question every single thing that we're doing, because 9 times out of 10, it is rooted in colonial white supremacy, heteronormative patriarchy. And we should question that. We should question that every second of every day. Why is it that we say, howdy neighbor, or whatever the terms are? Like, why is it that we do those things? You should question every single thing, because I guarantee you, at some point, it's going to tie back to some type of oppression. I guarantee you it's going to tie back to that. This has slightly nothing to do with this topic, but also it does. And so, like, in my research, I'm starting to learn more about just how embedded oppression, white supremacy, and patriarchy is. And the participants that I'm interviewing, they're talking to me about their experiences and how they were dismissed, how they were discounted when they went to the doctor's office. And you all know I study maternal mortality rates impacting African descent folks who can labor children. And so I was really trying to understand one specific thing. And someone said to me, well, one thing that I processed about my birth is, I know the doctor gave me a husband stitch. And I didn't know what that was. And so I asked the person, I said, can you elaborate more on that? I'm sure by you saying husband, it has something to do with patriarchy, but can you please just give me a little bit more? And she's like, oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. She said it has everything to do with patriarchy. And then she went on to explain, and I'll speak, cleanly for the younger viewers who may be listening. But basically, right after delivery and pushing the child out, if you did vaginal, there was this idea where you needed to be stitched back up, but it wasn't necessarily based on your comfort, even though you just pushed a child out. It wasn't based on your needs at all. It was based on making sure the stitches would be tight enough, if you understand what I'm saying, to meet the expectations of your partner for intimacy at a later point. When really, like, a child just came out, so that's not where your mind is, first of all. Second of all, so what about you? Your needs don't get to be met, your needs don't get to be acknowledged, but not under patriarchy, no, because you don't matter. Just like under white supremacy and colonialism and capitalism, poor people don't matter, colonized people don't matter, African descent, Asian descent, none of those folks matter. So yes, that analogy and that story is slightly different, but it's also the same, because really what we're speaking to is the husband stitch never took into consideration the people that it was victimizing so that another group of people could benefit. And I would argue that is exactly what the US Constitution is about. Next slide, please. So, just continuing on that conversation, we can think more about, well, how many other lies have been told to us? How many more things should we start to reevaluate and think more critically on? I love this picture of the comrades stomping on the US flag, because to me, excuse me, that represents taking their life and their power and their respectability back, because that flag, I'm sure, has taken so much from that person. And so they're finding a way to regain their advocacy. They're finding a way to obtain their autonomy, because the US has taken so much from so many people. And so, I just want to put this into context, because, some folks don't understand like the background of what's going on. And so, if you think about when the Emancipation Proclamation was endured, if you will. So it was supposed to end slavery, but it wasn't created until 87 years. 87 years after the Declaration of Independence. So this document, the Emancipation Proclamation, was literally created darn near 90 years after the Declaration of Independence. So I don't want you to tell me, well, they wrote that because our forefathers were thinking of every human being. No, they weren't. Because if they were, then why were they still oppressing you for 90 years after the document was created? Why did they still consider you to be property 90 years after the document was created? Why did they still consider that it was okay for you to be devalued, dehumanized, not respected, not considered important, and to be considered as property as anybody else, your children, your partner, whoever, still moving on to the different plantations and doing what you had to do because you didn't matter? 90 years later, they would create the Emancipation Proclamation. And this is the problem when we accept and adapt ideologies such as having an American identity, is because you start to couple yourself, especially if you are oppressed, you start to couple yourself where you think that those values and those beliefs align with you as well. Those values and those beliefs have nothing to do with you. They have nothing to do with you. That would be like me feeling like I benefit from human privilege because males are humans. That does not mean that I benefit from the same privileges as males just because I identify as a person. I don't want to say human because I feel like that's exclusive terminology, but just because I identify as a person doesn't mean I benefit from the same privileges that males who are also people benefit from. So this is really important that we really break this down, because if you accept that ideology that you are an American and you're benefiting from all the same privileges that other quote unquote Americans are benefiting from, we strongly suggest you really unpack what that means. How are colonized people who identify as American, how are they benefiting? Give us some examples. How are marginalized gender folks benefiting who identify as American? How are differently abled folks benefiting who are also queer and colonized? How is that working out for them? They're still experiencing oppression from every freaking angle. Non-male people are experiencing oppression from every freaking angle. People who are colonized are experiencing oppression. Poor European people are experiencing oppression. So how are you going to tell me that there's benefits to being an American when no one here is respecting you? Your voice is insignificant. It does not matter. You have to demand respect every single day, and you need organizations that are fighting for justice to make other people respect you. What kind of sense does that make? But this is why we organize, because we don't know how else to get our power back. How else are we going to get our land back? How else are we going to fight and keep the neo-colonists out? Because we still have to fight to make sure they don't come back. All of this is by design. So I also want to acknowledge the Olmsted Act of 1863. This was institutionalized as a way of stealing land from indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And if you know your timeline, then you know that the Olmsted Act of 1863 took place in the same year as the Emancipation Proclamation. And so then we can move forward to Jim Crow, and we understand that that was the legalization of segregation in the US. That took place in 1897. And then from there, the law of the land until the 1970s was there so that there was time. There was never a time, excuse me, when the US, excuse me, was a good place for us. It was never a time when the US was a good place for indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. The Olmsted Act was literally a consenting way for indigenous people to miss out and lose out on their own land, just like they kidnapped and took Africans from Africa and continue to take the resources. They did the same harm and did some really messed up things to other groups as well. And so, it's just important to really understand that background. Like I said, to really be able to put that timeline together, because now you can really see, if we think about the Emancipation Proclamation developing 90 years afterwards, if we think about the Olmsted Act and the impact that had not only on our comrades of indigenous descent, but also on us, right? And what that looks like, then we can also start to see how this progression of Jim Crow becoming legalized with segregation, how all of that was starting to unfold. Because from the moment we got here, you all, we were only considered to be a means to an end. And what happened was, some of us didn't survive and make it. Some of us were here and we died. But for the most of us, we were able to figure out a way to survive. Maybe we escaped, whatever. And then our lineage started from that position where we started to get to a point where first we were interested in getting back home to the motherland. We were just talking about this in work study yesterday with the piece we're reading now. I think it's B.V. Thompson, Africa in Unity. And they were talking about how in the early 1800s, you had all these Africans who were trying so desperately to get back home to the continent, or what we may call at that time migration, what BV called migration. And I noticed in the early 1800s, that's all anyone was talking about. There was even a comrade, Paul Kufi, who took 38 Africans back to the motherland. So shout out to Paul, right? But later, as we progressed into the later 1800s, now we're starting to see that more people are starting to adopt what he referred to as assimilation, where we have comrades like Booker T, we have comrades like WEB, and they're telling people, y'all, we just need to figure out how to stay here and make it happen. We need to figure out how to survive. We need to take on this capitalist ideology. Now, you're not going to be a first class citizen. You need to accept the fact that you'll be seen as a second class citizen, but at least you'll be a citizen. What? And that's just so interesting to me because, like I said, at the beginning of that, we had no issue with going back home to our continent. But as that time period progressed, we started to give up. We started to buy into the capitalist ideology. We started to buy into the lifestyle that was never meant for us. It was never, ever, ever meant for us. That's why we've been struggling to fit in since the beginning of time. That's why we've been struggling to figure out how to wear our hair since the beginning of time. We've been struggling to figure out why our body is considered to be BMI over, because it doesn't take into account bone density and voluptuousness. We've been struggling to figure out why we're so loud and why people have to complain that we're so loud. We've been struggling to figure out why we just handle things a certain way. In other cultures, that's just not how they do things. All of that is because we are who we are, and we are not supposed to be on the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere's land. That's the bottom line, you all. So it's like trying to force a puzzle piece that is in the shape of a square, and you're doing the best you can to put it in a circle piece. It is not going to fit. So instead, maybe consider going back home to the continent so you can really tap into who you are. But before you do that, get your passport and sign up and join an organization that's working for justice so that you can learn more about the US lies and the contradictions that B.B. Thompson, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Ture, Amilcar Cabral, so many other authors that I can't even think of right now on our work study list will be talking to you about. That is the best way that you can help free your people is by increasing your political education and joining an organization that is working for justice. So don't believe the hype and keep up resisting capitalism.
Ashe, obrigado, Madasi. And I want to pick up on, for the rest of the time that we have, something that you said that really, I hope, really resonates with folks. And that's that you talked about how the capitalist countries, because we're not just talking about the US, we're always talking about the entire capitalist empire. Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, all of them are Portugal, Australia, Canada, and of course the Zionist state of Israel. They're all a part of the capitalist empire. It's a US-led capitalist empire. But you talked about how they always do things, the empire does, based on their interests. Like whatever decisions they make, it's based on their interests. And that it's funny to me that you said that, because I'm reading this book right now. It's so good. I read, taking a few days of recharging, and I've been able to take on quite a bit of reading. That's what I do, is read. So I read about 150 pages in this book today alone. It's called America's Tyrant, the CIA and Mobutu of Zaire, or the Congo. And the book talks about how, people are talking a lot more about the Congo today, which is great. But the book talks about the reason why you have such instability in the Congo today is because of what's happened there over the last 125 years or so. And it leads all the way up to, all of the events that happened. And especially over the last 60 years ago, 60, the United Snakes of America has played a major role in destabilizing the Congo. And we've done programs on that. You should watch them if you haven't, to get a perspective on why I say that. But my point is that the author of this book makes a strong effort to illustrate the point that the U.S. always acted in a way that was designed to preserve its political and economic interests in the Congo, its ability to have access to the uranium, its ability to have access today to the cobalt, the coltan, the gold, the diamonds, the copper, all of those vast resources which come from that region of Africa, which is the most resource-rich region on the planet Earth. And so every decision they made, from the Eisenhower administration to Kennedy to Johnson to Nixon to Ford to Reagan to Bush to Clinton to Bush to Obama to Biden and whoever the next clown is, have always been about one thing: preserving capitalist interests and access to those resources. And that's important because that was always how the U.S. did things. And when we talk about the Second Amendment and the U.S. Constitution toilet paper, that refrain is still 100% correct. That when they wrote that document, as Shakur mentioned, their concern was for establishing a document that would preserve their capitalist interests. They had no intention of including us in that process, no concern about it, and they still have no concern about that today. So that's why it's important for us to dissect things like the Second Amendment, and we can do this with anything in this country, and we can easily expose the racist origins of it, because when they put it together, they weren't doing it for us. They didn't even consider us humans. So they had no concern about what impact it had on us. And here today, we got all these people trying to tell us that the way out of this is for us to twist and bend and smile when nothing's funny and scratch when nothing itches and do everything we can to try to fit into this empire. And if you understand anything I just said, you should be able to know that that logic is absolutely absurd to us. It's anti-human, and it has a total lack of dignity to suggest to us that that's the path forward, is for us to integrate into this empire. And to illustrate that, that's why we have these types of topics. Because if we go back to the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, you should read it. We're not going to list it here. You should read it. You should know it. But it basically talks about the primary language in it is that the states have the right to form a well-regulated militia in order to ideally protect themselves from government tyranny. So you can see this today, 250 years after the damn toilet paper document was written, because these people on the right in this country and around the world, because the fascist right is all over the world, but in the US, they refer to the US Constitution. They're constantly referencing the Second Amendment as the basis to justify their arming themselves with guns to protect themselves from this government tyranny, which in their minds is represented by the people on the left, so-called left. I don't think anybody in the Democratic Party is really on the left. I don't think liberal people who subscribe to liberal bourgeoisie politics are on the left. That's not the left to me. The left to me is people who are outside of the capitalist system in their thinking and want to support mass movements for justice to overthrow capitalism. That's how I define left. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. I don't know how you can say that you're left and you support genocide against Palestinian people, you support mass incarceration. These people you all are talking about are on the left. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, those are fascists. So I don't know how the hell a fascist can be on the left. That's just confusion. But anyway, my point is that if you look at this Second Amendment here, what I just articulated, certainly that was a part of it. We're not here to say that this question of government tyranny was not anywhere in the reasoning of these thugs who wrote this, but we are saying that tyranny part was only a small part of the reason why they wrote the Second Amendment. And the larger portion of it is not even talked about today. And that's why we're talking about it. And that larger portion of it is that the Second Amendment was written to protect and ensure the existence of Southern militias. And these militias had existed for a century or so before the Declaration of Independence was written and the U.S. Constitution was written. They existed to attempt to intimidate our people from rebelling on slave plantations. That's why these militias existed. And in many of the states like Georgia and Louisiana, if you were a European male working on a plantation, by law, you have to belong to one of these militias who existed to intimidate our people and attempt to intimidate us from organizing slave revolts. Now, of course, all forms of oppression breed resistance. So I don't care how many damn militias they had, that was not going to stop us from organizing for our liberation and our freedom. And that proof is in if you look at the resistance led by Denmark Vesey, the resistance led by Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner, and so many others. C.L.R. James has an outstanding book called Pan-African Slave Revolts, where he chronicles 300 slave revolts in the Western Hemisphere, not just in the damn United Snakes of America, but all over the Western Hemisphere. He documents those. These are the reasons that the chattel slave system went out of existence. But these European men were required to belong to these militias. And so these crackers wrote this Second Amendment because they wanted to legally protect the right of these slave patrols, is what they call them, before they started calling them militias like they call them today. the ones that exist today. They call them militias, but they're slave patrols. That's what they were created to do, especially after the Emancipation Proclamation, because once chattel slavery ended, African people wanted to leave the plantation life and search for a better life. That's why we ended up in all other places of this country that we exist in. But these patrols changed their mission from one of intimidating us from revolting on the slave plantation to going outside of the slave plantations, being now employed by the plantation owners and terrorizing our people to force us back to the southern states to work as sharecroppers. That's why these militias or slave patrols were supported to exist. And this is the reason why, if you read the Constitution, if you study it, the original Second Amendment was written by James Madison, and he had the word nation in it when he talks about a well-regulated militia in the nation. And that makes sense in the logic that these crackers were using, because the Constitution is a national document. It's not a state document. It's a national document for the whole country. But Madison and Patrick Henry and all these other crackers, they discussed it further, and they decided it would be in the best interest to take out the word nation and substitute it with the word state, which is how it reads today. And the reason why they did that is because they saw the federal government having the potential to govern and illustrate authority over the southern states, in which, of course, that ended up happening after the U.S. Civil War, right? That's exactly what happened. And so what these crackers didn't want to do is put the southern states in a position where they had to be subservient to any northern will to end slavery or end the southern states' ability to oppress African people. So they wanted to ensure that these militias would be protected from that. And that's why they substituted the word state. Now, once the Civil War happened, and that happened because the northern capitalists wanted to industrialize the South, it had nothing to do with freeing us. Nothing these people have ever done has been designed to improve our conditions. Nothing, not a goddamn thing they've ever named me one thing they've done. And if you're stupid enough that you think there's something, bring it to us and we'll show you in 5 seconds how you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Now, one thing they've ever done has been designed to improve our conditions. Nothing. The only things that have happened that have genuinely attempted to improve our conditions is because of the work we did to push to make those things happen. This country has never done anything. It's never the goddamn thing to make it, not one single thing ever. This is the reason why these terrorist slave patrols were allowed to participate. And, you know, it's always interesting. Ever I feel like making critical point that needs to be made, now my internet is unstable. You know, that's always interesting to happen every single time, I'm telling you. But we'll keep going forward. So this is what happened. And here in the picture here, you see a picture of these crackers commemorating the slave patrols. This is a recent picture. You can see modern crackers in the picture, but they're commemorating the slave patrols that we're talking about, that existed. And so, you know, legal anti-African militias or slave patrols. And we talked about Madison and Patrick Henry. You know, Patrick Henry in school, they taught us, give me liberty or give me death. And this cracker owned Africans as slaves. His family's slaveholder, him and James Madison. Well, like Shakur said, almost all of them were damn slaveholders. If they weren't, they supported slavery. You know, they believed in it philosophically. Even if they didn't have the resources to own our people themselves, they still supported it. So they're all guilty. And that's why I have the picture of the historical crackers and then the modern crackers, because to us, they're all the same. To you all, some of them are different. Well, this one's better than that one. A racist cracker is a racist cracker to us. I mean, one like Malcolm X told us 60 damn years ago, one's a fox and one's a wolf. That's the only difference. They both will eat the hell out of you at the end of the day. So, you know, you're debating over hairs. Like we're not going to do that. You know, we're going to talk about what's in the best interest of our people. But both of these crackers, Madison and Henry, they were both from slave-owning families in Virginia. And so they had a vested interest from their own experience to write the Second Amendment in a way that would protect the slave institution, whether it was keeping us on the plantation or forcing us to return to the plantation. Didn't matter to them. It was just a way to preserve the Southern racist way of life. And once the Constitution was ratified, the Second Amendment ratified into the Constitution in December of 1791, these idiots modeled this amendment after these legalized slave patrols, particularly in the state of Georgia, for example, because I mentioned in Georgia, they had perfected these slave patrols and these militias. And so they wanted to ensure that this was modeled all throughout the Southern U.S. And of course, if you know the history, police forces in this country were created based on the model from these slave patrols. So this whole concept of law and order and policing was always about repressing African resistance and indigenous resistance. The mounted, whatever I can't remember what they call them, in Canada, the Canadian mounted police, they were created to move the indigenous people off of those lands so that they could build a railroad. So police have never been about protecting and serving us. That's why they don't. You shouldn't be shocked. Whenever we see oppression by the police against our people and an African says, I'm shocked, then I know that's just a dumb African. That's an African doesn't know a damn thing and hasn't studied anything about our history. Because anybody that studied the slightest thing about our history can know that these people were never here to support us and help us. They've always been here to repress us. That's their damn job. And we have to stop being so idiotic about that and thinking that the solution is us joining them in these police forces. How has that helped us? Show me where there's African police now where our conditions have gotten better with police. It's never happened and it never will. So this is what happened there. And I'm just going back and forth to show you how what these people created is still in existence today. It was never designed to change, and it will never change until we change it. And this is why, Henry and Madison argued successfully, as I mentioned, to change the wording from security of a free nation to security of a free state. And if you studied U.S. politics and things like the Southern strategy, right? The Southern strategy is about these crackers realized in the 80s they couldn't use the overtly racist language that they had been used to using. So instead, they started using code language. And so instead of saying things like, well, we don't want any African people here, they would just say, well, we're really concerned about law and order. And everybody knows what they're really saying underneath that is we don't want any Africans here. Instead of saying things like, we don't think women should be in the workforce, now they say things coded like, well, we just have to make sure that we respect our Christian beliefs that men have roles and women have roles. So these coded ways that they say things are easier for people to swallow. People that may object to hearing us referred to as the N-word wouldn't object to hearing law and order. So they use this code. That's what the Southern strategy is. And this concept of Southern rights, that's Southern strategy. That's code language. Whenever you hear you hear that Marjorie Taylor Greene alien, warlock, witch-looking woman, looks like a damn we remember the toys Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Look like one of those damn toys. Whenever she's on there with her crazy ass talking about states' rights. This is code language, you all. Anti-African. We need to repress these people and keep them down. And she's from the state of Georgia, which is what we're talking about here. So y'all got to understand that. This is what we're talking about. And that's why these crackers framed this. They were talking to her. She's their damn daughter. All of them. She's their daughter. All of them, including the Democrat. She's a daughter, too. She's closer to him than she is to me. We have nothing in common. Both of them support the state of Israel. Why would I see them any different? Both of them support the subjugation of Africa. Why would I see them any different? Both of them support the colonization of the Americas from the indigenous people. Why would I see them any different? I mean, you're satisfied because one of them gave you $5 for 4 years, and the other one didn't give you jack squat. Keep your damn $5. That'll help us. The more uncomfortable we are, the closer we'll be to organizing to finally get rid of this filth. So the irrefutable racist history, right? Irrefutable is that everything about this country is racist, as you know what? Not just the Second Amendment, everything about this country is racist. You know that these people talking about they support gun rights don't support gun rights when it comes to oppressed people having guns. Y'all know that, and they know that, and they know you know that they know that. You know damn well. Ronald Reagan, cowboy Ronald Reagan, when the Black Panther Party did the Black Panther Party did patrols against racist Gestapo police in Oakland and San Francisco and Richmond in 1967, where I grew up. These crackers, led by Ronald Reagan, led by the National Rifle Association, led by racist Marin County Senator Don Mulford, they immediately enacted gun control in the state of California. And all those crooks I just mentioned supported it. And every one of these crackers supports it when it comes to us arming ourselves against them. Now, all of a sudden, the Second Amendment doesn't mean everybody has a right to guns. So, you know, they don't believe that. What they believe is what this document was always designed to do: give them guns to use against us. That's the sole purpose, the primary purpose of this document. That's what it means. And whenever they're talking about it, that's what they're talking about. When they're talking about we need guns against criminals, they're saying we want to make sure we have guns so that we can shoot you, African. That's what they're saying. So you Negroes out there that are like, well, we need to exercise our Second Amendment rights. You're out of your goddamn mind. You don't have any Second Amendment rights. You don't have any rights under this capitalist system. The only thing that we have is our dignity to finally wake up and decide we're going to fight for ourselves, no matter what the hell these people think and no matter what they want to do about it. We're going to fight for ourselves and we're going to fight for our dignity for our future generations. That is what we have to understand. Everything about this empire is racist, as you know what. The American concept of American identity equals white supremacy. So if you calling yourself an African, like the other day at my slave, I was directing an exercise, and it's called the social identity exercise. And what happens is we had like 25 people. You go in the circle and you shout out an identity. And the people who identify with that identity go in the circle with you. And you can only shout out an identity that you yourself represent. So, you know, it's a very interesting it's a very interesting icebreaker. That's what I was using it for, because people will go in the circle and say, at first it starts out innocuous, right? People say father or parent or, you know, artist or something. And then as the game goes on, because it goes on for about 30 minutes, people start to shout out some much more serious identities like undocumented or sexual assault survivor or incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, you know, things like that. And then the purpose of the exercise is that you think you're the only one, and then other people come in the circle. And then you realize, okay, you know, I'm not alone. You know, I have people here that I can, you know, maybe talk to, build a relationship. So that's the importance of it. So we did the exercise, I'm conducting it. And when we got through, one of the people who's not African said, I was just surprised. I mean, I don't know why if he said this because I was leading the exercise, I don't know. But he said, I was just surprised nobody said African American. And there were like 4 Africans, 5 or 6 Africans of us there. And I just said, well, I didn't say that because I'm not an American. And everybody laughed because they know, you know, they knew that was what I would say. I'm not an American, so why would I say that? And he was like, oh, I meant African. I'm like, okay, well, then say that. Don't say African because you know that that's not it. And I've had that conversation with this person, so that's why they finally responded the way they did. But my point is that this concept of being an American, whether it's a hyphenated American, whatever kind of damn American you want to be, all you're doing is perpetuating this systemic racism that we've been talking about for the last 50 minutes and what we talk about every week. That's all you're doing. So if you haven't done it already, you should today denounce the American part of the identity you've been using. Don't use it anymore. Say that you're an African fighting for African dignity. You're an African fighting against capitalism. You're an African fighting for Pan-Africanism. That's the one I use. You're a European fighting against injustice. People ask you, what's your nationality? I'm a European fighting against injustice. Just say that. It's accurate. If it's true, if you're really doing that, it's accurate. And if you do that, you'll feel better. I'm an American. You sound like a damn fool, because what you're doing when you say that is you're saying all of the stuff this empire does, you are in agreement with it, because that's what that means. So why are you doing that? Stop doing it. We're not saying that you're a problem because you're white. We don't have a problem with you because you're white. We got a problem with you because you're stupid. You keep claiming the identifying with the empire. That's our problem with you. That's what we have a problem with. Just that. You stop doing that, we don't have any issues with you, because you're no longer our enemy. But as long as you do that, you are propping up the system that's oppressing us. So that's the first thing we have to do. You can't separate, dissect, or recreate a positive identity from a history and current practice of terror and oppression. And to you Africans that use the N-word, the same logic applies to you. I'm sitting here where I am, my wife and I, and this European woman, we're sitting around eating, and she's over there talking about ghetto this, ghetto that. And I can't even really get mad at her. I said something to her, but I can't even really get mad at her. I'm mad at you, because you're the ones that created this dumbass, childish logic, well, that we can use it as a term of endearment, but you can't use it. And that, English isn't even your damn language. It was forced upon you by violence. And you sit here talking about you can recreate something positive for us in a language that was forced on us by murdering us. And you sound like a damn idiot trying to make that make sense. And we got to stop with that kind of nonsense, because we've been saying that for decades now. And what has it gotten us? Where is it improved? Show me where there's a community of us using the N-word where we have broke off the yoke of oppression. You can't do it because it doesn't exist, and it will never exist. We got to stop playing these dumbass games just because we're too intellectually lazy to raise ourselves and step up our game to a higher level as human beings. And that's what we have to do to get away from this situation we're in. Irrefutable racist history. You are either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. If you identify with the U.S., and I would argue, if you're African and you're calling us the N-word, you're doing the work of white supremacy. Because I had a young person years ago, and he was using the word, and this was an African that, he loved church. He was active in his church. And he would use the N-word, and he'd argue with me about it. And one day I asked him, I'm like, so, because he said, it's just a term of respect and endearment to me. That's all it is. And I said, so you, because he was always talking about his pastor. So I said, so when you see your pastor, you say, well, hey, what's up? You say that to him? Well, no, I don't. Well, if it's a term of endearment and respect, you would call him that. You would call your parents that if you love and respect. Everybody you love and respect, that's the first thing you would call them, because you just told me, unless you're a goddamn liar, that it's a term of endearment and respect. When I say you're a liar, I don't mean that you're intentionally lying. I'm just saying that you have been conditioned to believe nonsense. Okay, so that you are a liar. It's objective. If that makes people mad, that's your problem. Get over yourself, because you can't refute what I'm saying. That this is what we're doing, is we're perpetuating our enemy's logic against us, right? And you can stop using that word. I used it more than you did until I was 17, and I learned better, and I haven't used it since. And you cannot tell me that it has not positively influenced the life energies that I emit into this universe. If you say that, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. My daughter, who's on here with me and can stop me if I'm lying, was never raised in an environment where that word was used. And her positive self-esteem is largely the result of those types of practices. And when we don't see that among our youth that's growing up, that's because they don't exist in those types of environments. And it's nothing special about us. It's just we were willing to do work that most of us aren't willing to do. And all of us need to be willing to do it. That's all we're saying. We're not any better than anyone else. A lot of you probably are much more skilled than we could ever be. So let's get to it. Let's make it happen. That's all we have to do. And understanding these racist, cold, Southern strategy, BS, U.S. Constitution, forefathers, we need gun rights for it. All of this is a bunch of nonsense. You are an escaped slave from the goddamn plantation. That's all you've ever been over here. And y'all, whether you like it or not, that's all you will ever be over here. And the only way you can change that is not by creating some fantasy version of how you can fit into the various system that's created all that misery for us. The only way that can be changed is when we decide to exert our dignity and organize ourselves and change the conditions. And when we do that, that's when we'll a state of freedom, dignity right now. So we thank you for joining us. Yeah, I know my internet connection is unstable after all of that. I'm sure it is. But join us next week, Sunday, July 14th, 2024, same time, same place. We're going to be preparing for Pan-African Women's Day, which is coming up. We're going to be talking about women freedom fighters in Africa. So we want you to join us for that. Very important program. And of course, our upper left-hand corner, AAPRP, the QR code, the red one. You can go to AAPRP programs. We have other programs beyond this one. You don't have to like this one, but you should support all programs that are trying to uplift our people and humanity. So we have many more there. The Forward Ever Shop, you can order clothes and support Revolutionary African Organization. Please do. Hoodcommunist.org. Definitely want to invite you to support our Revolutionary Pan-African blog. And you can go to join the APRP, aprp-intl.org. You can donate to the APRP. Venmo and PayPal on your screen there. Venmo at A-APRP and PayPal at AAPRP, no dashes. You should donate to Revolutionary African Organization. We don't have any buildings, y'all. You're not donating with us. We're not like that Umar Johnson dude. We're not telling you we're going to build a school and 20 years later we have nothing. But what we can tell you is that we are building international unity for African people. And I'm telling you right now, whether you see it or not, we need that much more than we need the building. That's supposed to be some kind of school right now when our people are disorganized. So we have plenty of schools that we work in AAPRP. That's not a big deal. I've helped start a number of them myself. So I'm not impressed with that, especially when you haven't even produced it. But what I'm saying is that we are building the unity amongst our people. And once we get that, we can build as many schools as we want. That'll be the easy part, building the schools once we have unity. So that's the work we're doing. So that's what you support when you donate to the APRP. And the bottom right QR code, the black one, is one of the many projects we have. And we have educational work happening there in Burkina Faso that support that. That's real work. That's not just somebody making YouTube's telling you it's going to happen. It's happening. And we can show you. You go there, you can see it for yourself. We don't have to fake, because we're not trying to make money off our people. We give way more than we receive. And we're good with that. And we invite you finally to support my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. You have to go to Amazon to get it. I don't have a printing press in my house. So, miss me with that. I don't shop at Amazon when you just went to Chevron to put gas in your car. Look, we're trying to overthrow all of capitalism. And the work that we do will help us organize ourselves to do it. And I'm going to use the enemy's tools to do it. I don't have a printing press. I don't have the way to mail books all over the world. And I can do that this way free. So Buy the book. It's only 8 US stinking dollars with those slaveholders on it, George Stinky Washington on it. So buy the book, and we will use this proceeds to continue to organize our anti-fascist work, which we totally intend to intensify within the APRP and outside of the APRP. So help us do that. We finance that through the sales of these books. So please help us. And we appreciate you joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. Forward ever, backwards never.